Cool. This will be fun, guys.
All right, everybody. So we're live now. So welcome everybody to the panel, The Science of Science Fiction. We're going to be talking with some amazing people here today, writers and narrators, about the science of science fiction or just science fiction in general. We want to welcome anybody who's here and wants to join us or comes in live to go ahead and post any questions, comments, or concerns you have in the chat section of the Facebook Live, and we will get to as many of those as we can while we're in here today. We have a pretty good set of star-studded panelists here with us today. We want to take a moment to say thank you guys for spending the time with us. We know that you could be doing other things, but you have taken that time out to come join us, and we are very much grateful for the time that you're spending with us here. What we're going to do here is I'm going to start out with an introduction, letting you guys plug in some of your work, things you're working on, things you're excited about, and we'll do that at the beginning and the end, so that people who are joining in the beginning get to hear, and if they have to leave early, or people who come in late will also get to hear that. So why don't we go ahead and we're going to do this a little differently today. Neil, how about we start off with you?
Oh, okay. Hi, Neil Helligers, narrator. Glad to be here on a non-narration focused panel. I, aside from being an audiobook narrator, I'm also a reader and listener. And that really is kind of the sort of the one reason I got into narrating audiobooks, or the kind of audiobooks that I narrate, which tends to be a lot of genre, sci-fi and fantasy, is because sci-fi and fantasy, particularly sci-fi, has really been my preferred reading genre for basically my entire life. I'm actually way more of a sci-fi guy than a fantasy guy, which is slightly heretical in a game like format. But I have a secret theory that all Gamelit is actually sci-fi, even though it looks like fantasy. But we can just talk about that. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to have the chance to talk about this stuff with these great fellows.
Awesome. All right, Xander, I'm going to pass it over to you next.
Yeah, my name's Xander Boyce. I agree with Neil that all lit RPG is sci-fi. I actually define it as sci-fi, even if there is a fantasy element to it. Or we could do space opera. I write, the Red Mage books, which are post-apocalyptic. I write Talrock, which is a lit RPG set in a video game, a VR world, in a fantasy world. But it's everything around it is all very science fiction-y, because there's sonic showers and things like nutrient tube paste and stuff that I picked up from my science fiction fans. And then I write a Cloak and Dagger lit RPG called Freshman Drive with Ryan DeBrune, which is about a basketball player who gets nanites injected into him. And yeah, that's me.
All right, Gabriel, I'll pass it over to you next.
Oh, thanks. Gabriel Rathwig. I write I Am Gamer series, Warrior Academy, and From Chef to Crafter to Conqueror, which is not lit RPG, which is more just straight science fiction fantasy. But yeah, I agree with Neil and Xander. Pretty much lit RPG and everything falls under that sci-fi umbrella, and then it kind of caters down. So it's funny because there's always like a little bit of actual science I think you have to have in it. And then there's like a wonderful, I think it's Arthur C. Clarke quote, where it's like any kind of advanced technology is like magic. So like as long as you have
advanced technology is magic to those
indiscernible from
right.
Oh, indiscernible.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks for correcting my correction of the correct.
Thanks for correcting me, correctors.
But who corrects the correctors, right?
Who watches the watchers? Sorry.
But yeah, that's it. That's to start off. I'll pass it along.
All right, Stephen, how about we finish up with you for this intro?
I'm Stephen Landry, and I am once again coming to you guys from by the sorry, camera's not that great. I with fantasy Stardiver. I'm also the co-author of the progression fantasy series Temple of the Storm. Hello,
Is anyone else only getting like every third word that he's saying?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Thanks, Stephen. We're having a little bit of trouble hearing, having you come through. It's breaking up a little bit. If you can find a way to get a little bit better reception, we can we'll make our way back to you to get another chance to give that introduction for what we're doing. But for everybody else here, can go ahead and start diving into the conversations that we're going to have here today. I want to go ahead and start off with kind of a general everybody question to make sure we're including everybody in these talks. The question is going to be, what do you think gives you some of your greatest inspirations, or what are your favorite inspirations for science fictions that you've read or seen in the past? Doesn't have to be books, could be TV shows, movies, whatever. What really gets you into the mood to watch something science fiction-y or continue on or read something that's science fiction based? Gabriel, I'll pass it off to you first.
All right. This will sound a little weird, but whenever I see something like really historically old, that really gets me feeling science fiction. Like when I look at like an old like Roman aqueduct, I'm like, man, that's crazy how that thing stood for 1,000 years. What would it be like 1,000 years from now if this is, what they did you know what I mean? Like, seeing really old things makes me think about the future, because I feel like it's all kind of cyclical. It just puts my mind in that right mood. So, and
Plus,
then
aliens built the pyramids anyway, right?
and
Sure.
aliens build the pyramids. Yeah. I mean,
Docking structures,
obviously, Stargate's history. We all know this.
basically a documentary. Yeah.
100%.
All right, Xander, we'll pass it off to you next.
Gosh, I love what Gabriel said with the contrast of like old and new and like the development cycles. What I love about science fiction is that what it does is it takes these aspects of society and says, what if? So I think that's one of the reasons why I said that Lit RPG is all science fiction, because it's all what if. What if we added, a gaming system to this? What if we had, monsters start spawning in the middle of DC, or all these what if questions. So anytime we have a what if, that's my like, oh, let's do science fiction. Let's do that speculative fiction concept of delving into it, figuring out how that's going to affect the rest of society, how that's going to change humanity going forward. And I think that's the kind of real exciting part of science fiction is getting to ask those what ifs and kind of delve into it a little bit.
Perfect. All right, Neil, how about you? What kind of things really get you in a science fiction mood?
If it's reading, and we're not talking like golden age sci-fi stuff, Ian Banks' books, like I wish I could remove the memory of them from my brain so I could read them all over again. Just the way there's an interesting thing that he does where it's the kind of sci-fi which I don't typically love, which is way advanced and you're not sure how anything works. There's no hard aspect to it, but it's just really well done. It's just well written. It's tone. It's funny. It's clever. It's innovative. Or Alastair Reynolds, who comes from a very hard sci-fi background, or the Mars trilogy, Kim Reynolds, which is very hard and very political at the same time as well too. But something that I always kind of think back to that kind of blows my mind in terms of when I think of sci-fi was a History Channel thing, again, aliens, but it was about how it was about Nazi research in World War II about the Bell, which was sort of a UFO-shaped kind of structure, and that it was one of the paperclip kind of things that got passed over. And again, I know we're talking late night History Channel, 3 a.m. kind of stuff, but there was an aspect of the research that they were doing, because we know that the Nazis were crazy about their, tons of things, but in particular about the occult and things like that. And so they were trying to develop, as this documentary was talking about, basically like UFO level technology, hovering technology, using runic. And one thing that we knew about the structure that they were building called the Bell was that it had runes all around it. So it just blew my mind in terms of like, are all the things that we consider to be magic really just basically a different form of technology in the sort of core programming of the universe kind of sense? And that we're scratching the surface. And when we talk about our hard science, because what's really out there is a much, much deeper, much more interesting core level of stuff that we've barely scratched, because we consider it to be magical, and because it falls outside the purview of hard science. So it's that kind of stuff that really gets my brain going in terms of the interface between those two things and what's possible down the run. I'm clearly not saying we should be doing Nazi science, but I am saying that that there is an aspect of that, or at least this documentary, whoever was creating it, even if it was bullshit, frankly, that is supremely interesting.
I just saw yesterday 2 documentaries that I thought was really funny, that were both fake documentaries about one, the faking of the the Sweden versus Brazil World Cup in like 1964 or something like that, where no one in Sweden remembers it actually happening, and there was this whole like controversy about it.
The Mandela effect.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yeah.
But so no, it's not the Mandela effect, because it
No
was
one remembers it.
the the theory is that the U.S. put it on as like a thing to see if we could get TV to like fake reality. And it's totally fake. It was totally all engineered as like a thing,
like a War of the Worlds kind of thing. Like
yeah, crediting, trying to get people to credit their own sources and look at the the validity of their information sources and things like that. But like to this day, people still think that like that is a thing that didn't happen. That like the Swedish Brazil World Cup didn't actually happen, and I think it's really interesting to see kind of those interplays, especially when you talk about like
That's terrifying.
sources of information that we discredit.
Mhm.
So I like to look at things like old religions and see kind of those old psionic practices that you see in Buddhism or whatever, and wonder how much of those are actually real. Like, can you feel the electrical fields with someone's attention is on you? Like, there's all those kind of weird things that we consider magical, but like every human has a sense that someone is looking at them, that some attention is being paid to them.
I want to throw in two things before I forget. For one, Neil's right. Like, we are still doing Nazi science because, right, Operation Paperclip, the U.S.
Paperclip,
took
yeah.
half the Nazis and Russians took the other half.
Uh-huh,
I don't want to forget that. And then the second thing is I totally agree with your or piggybacking off your Sweden Brazil Cup. It's like the moon landing, right? Remember,
Right.
like the idea, like what's his name, the director, Eyes Wide Shut, Ridley Scott.
Yeah, Ridley Scott. Yeah.
Ridley Scott faked the moon landing and stuff. Like,
No, that's not Ridley Scott. That's
Oh.
fucking.
what's his
Someone
name?
look it up. Yeah,
The
other
guy that did
The other guy.
the Shining.
Kubrick. Yeah, thank you.
Kubrick, yeah, Stanley Kubrick, yeah. And then the third thing was, like, yeah, when people are looking at you, you do feel it. But I was watching this podcast the other day, and this neurobiologist was talking. You know, when like people are like upset or angry, and you're like, oh man, I can feel that energy.
Mhm.
You literally can, because like the body projects like a 4 or 5 inch like
Electrical field.
space.
It's
No,
Yeah,
no,
we're all
electrical
comprised
field
of
and chemical field. So like the
Yeah, yeah.
cortisone will be like 6 inches out of your body.
Yeah.
So when you walk by somebody who's like all messed up, you're like, man, what's wrong with this guy? Like, you are literally actually feeling that.
Yeah, when you walk into a
Yeah.
room and it's like a charged atmosphere, you can like
Mhm.
there's senses that we don't acknowledge. I mean, obviously the 6 senses, 5 senses, whatever it is, that's completely wrong. That's a vast simplification. Like, taste itself is like 3 or 4 different senses wrapped up in one. But there's so many different senses that we have that we just don't acknowledge, we don't focus on, we don't pay attention to, that other people have in the past. Like, there's a tribe of people in South Africa or Southern Africa that know intrinsically where north is. Like, because their language forces them to like know, because you greet someone by
magnetic north or south. Yeah.
yeah. So because of that, they just have, like, with animals, so they always know where north is.
Right.
These
That's how
tribe
pigeons, that's what migrating birds have a sense of.
Yeah,
Magnetic north. Yeah.
these tribe have actually developed their sense of north enough that they can actually know where north is at any given point in time.
There's the prevailing. I wrote a paper about this once in high school. This is my AP physics paper. It was about the scientific underpinning for ghosts, as studied by paranormal psychologists. Is that what a ghost is that 90% of hauntings are a result of or come out of a sudden violent death,
Mhm.
and they all sort of follow habitual patterns of the deceased. The prevailing theory is that what a ghost actually is that at that last minute of death, of sudden violent death, our electromagnetic system, that our nervous system, flares up suddenly, and on the sort of cyclical period of creating the conditions of that time of day or that time of year, or that repeated sort of channel, like the Widow's Walk kind of a thing of a ghost down the hall of a hotel, that's what the ghost is. So it's why they're hard to photograph, is because we're not actually seeing them. It's like radio bleed into our own nervous systems, and two people looking at a ghost see two different things. So they're not smart in the sense of like a spirit exactly. And they're kind of going through the patterns. But these paranormal psychologists did a study where they covered a site of a haunting with all these EMF detectors, and they detected all sorts of fields moving around, but they found them like moving down a hall and then making a turn and going right. Like naturally occurring electromagnetic fields don't follow like doorways and hallways and things like that as well too. So it's like something that has a very spiritual, magical kind of thing can just be could have a scientific understanding. So,
going off of that, can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
You're good.
Better.
Awesome. In college, I used to go out with MTP, Middle Tennessee Paranormal, and we would go and we would shoot different locations, and all of our equipment was very focused on detecting electrical sources and things like that, electric and magnetic sources.
What was that called? The EKG reader, the Ghostbusters thing? What was it?
Yeah. Let's see.
I didn't mean to get this on conspiracy theories.
Well, we're all in now. We're all in.
Well,
but talking about your like the fake documentaries and stuff. Like, did you guys ever see the dragon one that was on? Was it the History Channel?
I think I did. That was the one that they also did mermaids and stuff too.
They did mermaids. They did Tyrannosaurus Rex. That's one of the things I love about science fiction is the speculative aspect, the diving into the unknown.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I like about conspiracy theories is because they are like what ifs, but for our modern day society. Like they're just like, what if the moon landing was actually faked? And then you can kind of like delve into, what that would be, what the ramifications of that would be. And I think that's an aspect of humanity that we all have, is that desire to do those what ifs. And so that like ties it all together, which is why it's so prevalent in everyone, and why I think science fiction is so appealing to a lot of people, even though they don't really understand. I'm not going to make a decision one way or the other upon whether or not the moon landing was faked. You can make that decision for yourself. I'm just going to say that I believe that we've been to the moon.
I'm going to pick the squirrel back up and put him on the pole again. I want to give Stephen a chance to talk about some of his inspirations for science fiction stuff when we have this.
I mean, you guys all basically said it, especially Neil. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Ian M. Banks. The Culture series is mind-blowing. The way that the series introduces like these huge installations, the way it uses artificial intelligence as not necessarily an evil, but as a utopian ruler sometimes. I love that aspect. I love it when sci-fi improves the future, not necessarily when I love Warhammer, but that's definitely not a world I want to live in.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. All right,
But
so
what if you're like a
coming.
gray ghost or a space wolf and not like Imperial Guard? It might be cool.
I don't think anyone in that world is having a good time. Maybe the
I
town.
play
Maybe the
Space
town.
Wolves, so,
Maybe the daemons.
Well, probably the space orcs. They're probably having a good time.
Oh yeah, they love their jobs.
They wouldn't know it though. They're too dumb to realize that they're having a good time.
One of the things I love about that universe though is like, even though it's got all the magic, the webway, all that stuff, is like, even the orcs are basically fungus, so they have this biological component to them, and I love seeing that in science fiction.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we did have a question here come in from Jay Baraz. When writing an Earth-based story, apocalypse or other type, when you introduce lit RPG elements, how much do you worry about getting the science correct? And to change this a little bit for Neil, do you prefer that the science be absolutely correct, or do you want it to be something that's a little more hand-wavium, the system changed magic kind of things to make it work in a certain way, because obviously in some of the science fiction we talk about nowadays, we don't have all the answers. We don't know, because we're trying to create new tech. You're trying to create some new kind of technology that's going to be in a book. So for the authors, do you prefer to try to make sure the science is right, or have a little bit more of a mystery to it? And Neil, which one of those do you prefer if you're reading or narrating a book? Let's start with Xander on this one.
So one of the probably most correct science fiction writers of all time was Isaac Asimov. He's gone and he theorized wormholes before wormholes were discovered. Crazy guy. One of my favorite stories about Isaac Asimov, though, is that he wrote this futuristic society, spaceships and starships and everything, and then he has a reporter in there that has like a handheld recording device that he talks into, and it writes out. But he can't. But if he makes a misspelling, he can't backtrace, because Isaac Asimov was only on a typewriter, and he'd never encountered a word processor before, and so he had never had the idea that you could just back up and redo something. And so you have these glaring gaps in all science fiction, where you imagine crazy reality, however it is, but you're always going to have these small little gaps of like, I didn't foresee that, like Star Wars, where they have cords on their headsets, because the idea of a cordless helmet just didn't even occur to them at the time. So I like to do as much as possible, get things correct, but every now and again, magic is fun. Just have something that is just so outside the bounds of our reality that it's just magic. And so I did that in a couple of my books, where there's just some unexplainable, mysterious thing that comes and that changes everything. And I think that's fun, to have that one thing that is different, that kind of hinges everything else, personally.
Cool. Steven, I'll pass this one to you next.
I research like crazy. I go to museums. I try to talk to people. I write college professors. I interview veterans. If there's a way for me to research the subject, I will do it. But then when it comes to the actual story writing, depending on the flow of the scene, I will usually find a way to kind of evolve it or adapt the real world mechanic to the story. We don't have FTL travel in real life
yet,
but for a story, you can't just have a generational ship going from one place to another. It would take too long. So we have to find shortcuts, pathways to fix that. So there's definitely a lot of research, but then there's just as much hand waving.
Makes sense. Gabriel, how about you?
See, I kind of agree with both Xander and Steven. I find personally that I do a lot of research because I write a lot of historical fiction in my books. But I find if you have enough actual science, and most people get that, just broad science that most people can get, you can get away with the magical science later on. So as long as you got this is how a printer works, or this is how this works, and you're correct, then you have a lot of leeway later on when you're writing more fantastical science. So I try to get all the base science in, and then as long as that makes sense, then I can get fun and, here, this is my, food generator that runs on plutonium, just whatever. And there's I think it's I forgot the name of the movie. Oh, Thank You for Smoking. Thank You for Smoking. And there's a scene where they're trying to make a movie with two famous stars, and they're like, hey, they're in space and they're having sex, and we're gonna pimp cigarettes in this movie. They're like, well, wouldn't cigarettes, if you lit a cigarette in space, wouldn't the all oxygen atmosphere blow up and everybody would die? And the guy's like, yeah, Tom, we'll just put a line in there like, oh, thank God we invented that so-and-so thing so we can smoke in space. You know what I mean? So if you have enough actual science, it'll work out.
Yeah, I love that concept of the buy-in, having enough. So you have to have that. It's all about suspension of disbelief, right? So you have to give them enough reality to let them buy into the suspension of disbelief for the thing that you want them to be that's magic or that's unreal at the time. So yeah, I love that.
What Xander said earlier about I forgot what we were talking about, but like science fiction follows writing, you know, like there's a H.G. Wells wrote is H.G. Wells From Earth to the Moon? Anyway, whatever the book was, like read the 1800s about shooting a cannonball to the moon.
Yeah, there was that early film that was made of it with the big bullet-shaped thing going into the eye of the moon. Yeah.
Well, the funny part about that was
Jules Verne.
Jules Verne, yeah. He put the cannon in Port, like 100 miles from, or like 50 miles from Port Canaveral, where they actually launched the space shuttle. Like the part of the book took place like right around there. So it's funny, like you see, and that was like, way before we were going to go to space. So it's funny, you see like the science kind of follows science fiction because the writers write stuff and people are like, oh, could we do that? Maybe we could.
Yeah. No, there's
Cape
lots of
Canaveral is amazing. For the record, like that's actually one of the places I've gone to do research, and I watched a SpaceX rocket launch from the beach from Cocoa Beach, and at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was an absolutely epic sight.
Yeah, that's where I grew up, man. It's a great place.
Space Coast buds.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Where are we at, Xander?
Yeah.
Oh, I have been wanting to move to the Space Coast for a while. It's not I was talking about you two.
I think you were talking about Space Ghost for a second. I'm like, oh, we're going there.
No,
okay. Space Coast. Yeah, I got you.
Ghost to Ghost?
Yeah.
Space portion of Florida, which is near Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach, that area. But.
All right, Neil, I'll pass this one off to you. What do you kind of, when you're reading a book or narrating a book, you prefer that it's the science is all there, or is it okay to have some of that hand wavium, and just enough to just to suspend your disbelief in it and continue reading?
I mean, I think principally speaking, my job as a narrator is to make it work no matter what it is. To some regard, irrespective of what I think of it on a practical level. That being said, in order to sell the story, there has to be a certain amount of kind of practicality, but in a non-hard science kind of way to make it work. Like it has to have a logic to it. It doesn't need to be explainable, because that's also the truth that most people, the large majority of people utilizing any kind of technology, don't necessarily know the real underpinnings of how that works. Maybe a Jedi builds their own lightsaber, but do they necessarily understand the molecular mechanics behind how the energy transfer happens from the crystal otherwise, and is that, and also on a certain level, is anything that is unknowable. It's like the reverse of the Asimov thing. If you don't understand it, and it's basic and it's so rudimentary as to be commonplace, does it need to be like completely thoroughly researched to the extent that it makes a difference in terms of good storytelling? The bulk of my research in that regards only really comes down to making sure that I'm pronouncing scientific terms correctly, because much in the same way that authors get called out if they don't do their research, and I see that in reviews and things like that too. If I mispronounce things, I get it just as hard. So
how do you say albacore? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I'd have to look. As I'm going, there are a certain number of words that I look up, no matter how many times. Niche. I right now don't even know which one is. It's kind of both in a certain way. But
I was going to say, hasn't it become like both at this point? Kind of like decimate. Everyone gets mad at decimate.
Yeah. Technically speaking, is to divide things into 10, but it could mean to just destroy.
The historic meaning, not the technical meaning. The historic meaning is to divide 1/10. Is to take off 1/10.
1/10 of something. Yeah. Like
but that doesn't that meaning has gone away, and it just means to destroy liberally.
Well, and in that sense, it's kind of like, to make the analogy, like if it makes sense in the moment that like one battalion decimated another, it doesn't have to be the case that they're like, all right, everyone, line up. We're going to count 10% of you off and only kill the rest of you. The rest of you can go home to your family. Like that makes less sense, frankly, in those kind of contexts as well too. But
language evolves.
Exactly. So as to what I'm reading and things like that, it's funny. It's like I brought the example of the culture novels where, like Stephen was saying, it's these AI ships, and then you have Peter Hamilton's books, which also involve like intense AI ships. And I've tried so many times to read those Peter Hamilton books because the premise of them seems amazing, and I just kind of can't get into it. Because it feels too like I have no idea what's happening here scientifically. There's no underpinning whatsoever that I'm relating to, and it's not that there's that much more of it. It's just like it's the storytelling. Banks's storytelling is just the style of it is much more appealing to me than Hamilton's storytelling. I'm not saying one is necessarily better than the other, or that what one is right or one is wrong. So when it comes to my own storytelling, I'm trying to make it work no matter what, even if it frankly doesn't make sense. My job is to make it make sense and have it have its own kind of logic or belief or discovery or things can be unknown. And I think that's just as interesting. That builds attention in a story as much too. When people are, this happens all the time in game lit, as people are exploring and growing out their stat sheet, they have no idea what they're doing most of the time. They don't understand it, but they can
in
do
both
it.
fantasy and science fiction, a reader has to have a suspension of disbelief. It's why we put the fiction in the science fiction.
Yeah.
Two things. So Neil, so you do a lot of research and you like try to make sure you say the words correctly, right? How mad do you get when you say the word correctly, you know it's correct, and somebody's like, hey, you pronounced that wrong? And then
I mean, this sort of like, it's a pick my battle situation about being like, if that's how you feel about it, I can't do anything about it. And it's usually not something that like costs me anything if someone else is wrong. I have to be kind of like, there's a serenity prayer moment with that as well too. But a friend of mine, Gary Furlong, who's a great narrator, Irish narrator, routinely will get people saying his Irish accent is completely inaccurate. I'm like, okay, so we can't write for them. We can't narrate for them. We're narrating for the other 9/10 of people who don't deserve decimation, who are completely down with it and are completely okay with being like, you know what, maybe there's some gaps here in the scientific understanding of what's happening here, but it's a good story. It's a thrilling moment. I like this character. I like this moment. I'm okay with it. And it doesn't that, like Stephen was saying, that disbelief is well suspended and everyone's having a great time.
So my question is, Neil, do you ever mispronounce things because the character would mispronounce them? And how badly does that come out if you do?
Well, it's always a very tempting idea, especially with names or like an MC who is like, what's the name of this crazy magical place that everyone else is from, but they don't know. So they're like, Voldran, what is it? Recently I narrated for this is kind of like this again, this is science fiction, Cosmic Horror, for Weird Tales' 100th anniversary, and I was able to narrate them. I was very happy to do this really for the second time, Call of Cthulhu, which is what Lovecraft wrote at some point, saying it was pronounced like it's supposed to be a word that humans have difficulty pronouncing.
Okay,
because it's Eldred and so forth.
Right.
And in the story, the main character first encounters the word written out, and he spells it out, and I have him sound it out as Cthulhu because that's what it looks like on the page, right? That's how you would read it directly. And then later on, he says, when he's talking to someone who says like, and they provided a phonetic description of the word, and then he sounds it out there as Cthulhu. And then from that point on, for the rest of it, he says these crazy natives in Greenland and in Louisiana were worshiping Cthulhu, which is it makes it harder to slip it into everyday conversation. But that's I tried doing both as a way and justifying it through the text.
Right.
But that's a whole different kind of science.
Yeah. Do you ever have problems like with those fake made up? Because I have a linguistics background, so when I was writing one of my books, I wrote names of characters that were intentionally hard for the human mouth to pronounce because they're not human. And so I was like, why would they have human pronunciation? Like, and then I was like, I'm really sorry, Andy. I'm really, really sorry. Just do your best with the dragon names because they don't. Yeah,
there's a dragon. The book I'm working on right now, Sean Oswald's Tail Smash. There's a name of a dragon, a white dragon at the end. He's like, sorry about that. Like that's fine. I don't even. It's here somewhere. I'll look it up. But I guess I try to make it kind of come up with a rubric that works in terms of like this culture. When the A comes up, the end of it's always like an open A or a long A or something like that, and build some kind of consistency. Whether that matters to anyone aside from myself, It's hard to say, but
Yeah.
it's it's nice. It's nice, and it's nice when it happens, when it falls together, when
Right.
the author's done that work.
And that reminds me of another great science fiction novel, Honor Harrington,
Oh,
where
yeah.
the first book, the author actually gave the wrong pronunciation for Manticoran to the narrator, and so the narrator used the correct pronunciation for Manticoran, but it was like Monoticoran or something like that was how the author wrote it, and so
Is
the
it powered
first
by mana
anyway,
or mana, if you prefer?
yeah, mana.
Mana?
Wait, we don't all say mana?
No, when
It's
I
not?
say mana.
Mana.
I say
yeah,
mana.
Everyone disagrees with this. We don't want to talk about this. We don't want to.
Well, I always see in my head. I always
Nothing to do
make the
with sci-fi.
distinction.
We're way off target.
Mana is the bread from heaven, and mana is the
Okay, so the word in the Bible is mana. It definitely has that, like in Hebrew it's
Yeah,
pronounced mana. But if you look in the Standard Dictionary, it usually says manna. People understand it in like a King James, people that became said manna. Mana, and that's like a fungus bread that they ate in the desert, right?
right.
Yeah.
But mana is a Proto-European, Pacific term that has to do with it's a spiritual formation.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so that's why I say mana, because I think it's more related to that. To something older than the Old Testament, even, or than Western religion,
right.
and the pronunciation there than it is with fungus in the desert.
So are you
that
saying
people
there's
ate.
3 pronunciations, Neil?
Mana?
Oh,
Mana.
mana. Okay.
But again, no one agrees with me
All
on
right.
this, so and that's fine. I'm okay with that.
I use
Yeah.
the Super Nintendo definition, like Secret of Mana. Secret of
I'm
Mana.
gonna throw the
Legend of
rope out there
Mana.
again and wrangle us all back
Okay,
in.
yeah, sci-fi,
sorry.
sci-fi. Oh, Stephen.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw the rope out there and wrangle us back in again to the topic, because we're
Yeah.
the ADHD
What?
today is just unreal sometimes. So
No.
Tuesday.
I'm gonna pull us back into the topic here. We're talking about we had a question coming from Kyle that asks, is there music to listen to that gets you into the right headspace? I'm gonna change it slightly to for science fiction in general. Is there something that you're listening to driving down the road and you're like, I'm gonna go read an Asimov book this evening because this really kind of inspires me or whatever for that. So Gabriel, let's start with you on that.
So not like a particular song or genre, but like I incorporate music to pretty much all my books, and like I kind of have I have a soundtrack that goes along. So like depending on, it could be Led Zeppelin or it could be Migos I'm listening to, and if I hear like something that just kind of starts me thinking, it's not like when I listen to classical I'm like in this mood, or I listen to rock I'm in this mood. It just depends on the song. So like just if the song starts speaking to me a certain way, I'm like, oh, it'd be really fun to do this. Like, it'd be really cool fight scene is if, they're listening to like Dancing in the Rain or I don't know, something stupid like Set It Off or something. And you're like, man, that'd be cool if like this guy was doing this thing and da 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 da. So it just depends on like the song itself, like not a specific genre.
Okay. Xander, how about you?
So 2 things. I can't have vocalizations while I'm writing, otherwise they distract me because I'm a very word-oriented person. But I do have soundtracks that I use for fight scenes, or if I need to do a down scene. I'll have, if I look at kind of what I'm looking for in the scene, and I'll try and pick music that has the same tone, because that helps me stay on tone when I'm writing it, if I'm listening to something that has the right tone. So I have lists of songs that are for specific types of scenes, not specifically for science fiction, although like electronica, like Euro disco music is probably like what I would think of as like classic science fiction sounds. Or just I have a soundtrack called Lasers in Space.
Pew pew.
Well, it's not quite that, but it's like the sound of like aluminum. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff that goes into that. But yeah, which of course, obviously, lasers don't make any sound in space. We all know this because science tells us that sound doesn't transfer in a vacuum. But whatever. I like lasers in space. So
All right, Stephen, how about you? Any music really gets you inspired, or you feel like fits really well with science fiction?
A lot of my friends like to call me the death metal bard because I listen to a lot of metalcore and deathcore, especially when writing. There's almost always somebody growling or screaming in my ear. I also like to listen to a lot of like video game soundtracks, like God of War, Skyrim, uh, Warhammer Dark Tide has an amazing soundtrack. Uh, recently I've been listening to the Baldur's Gate 3 soundtrack while writing. Just anything that kind of sets the mood right. That's what I'm all for it.
Awesome. And Neil, how about you? Is there anything that you feel really kind of meshes well with science fiction, music-wise?
Well, usually publishers don't love when I listen to music while I'm recording, but they can edit that out. But yeah, I don't know. If when I'm prepping, sometimes I'll listen to music. But kind of like what Xander was saying about without lyrics, because that crosses too many wires. And I think in terms of sci-fi, I think of things like there's an Icelandic group called Apparat Organ Quartet that I particularly like. That has it's kind of like a super group of different Icelandic musicians that do some really great stuff. Then they range from something sometimes a little poppier, sometimes it's super heavy. I always think, when you mentioned about video games, I remember when I have a very distinct memory of playing Golden Axe on Sega Genesis. And instead of the music they were playing, we were listening to like Motley Crue. I just have a very particular memory of that as being like, when you mentioned about fight music, I think it's Gabriel who mentioned about fight music as well too. But I'm generally in the habit of like, when there's music in video games, for a while I would always take out the music because I wanted just the sound of it, and so it's like the environmental music of it always kind of spoke to me a little bit better. And in that sense, about like what space is like, it's either like, there was those recordings recently that they have of like solar. It's like they were able to make sonic representations of what solar wind sounded like. And you listen to it and you're like, wow, it feels a bit like, early 1974 synth stuff. But it is actually space. It is actually like the beyond, what's kind of coming through the ether towards us at all times. And we can't hear it, but can we? Maybe we can.
There are a lot of really cool space sounds out there, like the sounds that Jupiter makes, the sounds of like distant stars. Everything out there has noise. Like it's really it's kind of mind blowing when you think about it, because there is, even though it's traveling in space, we are still able to detect it.
Well, and most of the big really long distance telescopes are radio telescopes. They're not using optical wavelengths at all. So it's all sound essentially. At the really long distance, we're listening to the universe around us all the time. So yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see some sort of human auditory level representation. I'll have to go look up those sounds of Europa or whatever, or sounds of the solar waves. Sounds really cool.
So basically, a tree falls in the forest, it does make a sound.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
I have a similar to your Motley Crue. When Doom 2 came out, I turned the music off or the soundtrack off, and I would listen to "Baby Don't Hurt Me," "Baby Don't," over on repeat, killing her.
Yeah. Just be careful, Xander, when you go look up some of those videos of the sounds of space. Some people have changed the end sound to those things that they send to their friends to embarrass them. I've received a couple of those text messages myself. Hey, check it out, the sound of Saturn, and it's like one of those things.
So I was thinking Rickroll. You have a different set of friend groups.
I have a very, very. I have terrible friends. So
don't listen to it at work, is what you're saying?
Yeah, don't. Make sure you have headphones in or something so it's not loud.
Right.
Going off that last comment about the black holes, I think it's absolutely terrifying, the idea that if we're listening to space and then we focus on a black hole and there's just nothing.
Technically, you can't ever focus on a black hole. You focus on the event. Just
the
event horizon around the black hole.
True.
Which would have sound, because it is the point at which things are ejecting out, so it would have some particle emission.
I was just watching something. They were talking. There's a theory that the Tunguska event is the Tunguska, the one that blew up all the
Over
meteor
Russia,
that
yeah.
hit over Siberia. They're like,
Yeah.
there's a theory that there was like a super miniature black hole that was a part of it. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
There's also the prevailing theory that over Tunguska it wasn't actually a meteor because there's no crater and there's no rock that's ever been found. That the same day that happened, Nikola Tesla actually fired off one of his death rays, and he was aiming at the North Pole. And they say that supposedly that's what wiped out that like 800-acre area of forests. So kind of cool to think
I feel
about.
really sad sometimes about all the alternate histories that are written out there that wherein Tesla was able to kind of come into his own and wasn't suppressed by Edison and Westinghouse and all that stuff. All of those universes are always so much better than ours. in so many ways.
Oh man. Oh, so I was actually in the same video that I watched that had the fake Sweden thing, talked about the first recorded live BBC thing is actually from America back in before World War II, because there was a sunspot that hit the troposphere and the airwaves bounced off the troposphere and landed in New York 3,000 miles away before World War II, and some guy recorded it on like a hand cam like back before World War II. So that's the only recorded instance we have of British television prior to the war, is from some guy in New York who got it from a bounced signal off the lower atmosphere from a sun's flare. But
how do you feel about that theory that the first thing that everybody's going to see in space if we have aliens is like Hitler's 1939 radio broadcast? Like, isn't that the prevailing theory?
So that depends. I think that was the first long powered distance thing, but I think it depends on how fast. Like I think there's got to be an element of power that something else is going to overtake it eventually, because we're going to broadcast it at a better wavelength, or power structure.
But in any case, they'd have to be. I mean, whatever the nearest civilization is, there's still a couple 100,000 years before to make up that difference in transmission wavelength and things like that too, before it would naturally reach someplace, unless they're coming towards us. And if they're coming towards us, it's probably to conquer us. Because why would you?
I don't have my notes with me, but I think I'm 90% sure that radio signals, as they go out into space, they actually degrade over time. So if we detected anything, or aliens out there detected anything, we'd only detect the bare minimum of the signal, not actually any kind of broadcast.
It would attenuate a lot. Get bigger and bigger and bigger, and so you would need a bigger receiving signal. And it depends on how sophisticated your equipment is, right? So like if you have a sufficiently advanced equipment, it doesn't matter how much attenuation happens, you could theoretically recover any signal.
Yeah, one of the things I do in my science fiction and my lit RPG is when they're traveling, they're using relays to bounce communications, basically a massive satellite network that's not really satellites, but just an Ansible that's floating in space, making communication easier so it doesn't degrade.
That's always the question in Game Lit RPG, when people either it's telepathic, explained as a telepathic bond, so that's how they can talk to each other. But there's always this dearth of communication devices, which is the simplest kind of low-key technology you could do. As if you have the technology to imprint a screen in front of anyone, the system has the ability to do a stat screen in front of you. Then the system has the ability to do that between anyone. They just hold it out because it was like the whole thing about plots of movies that are solved by having a cell phone. There's so much plot action that happens that if people could communicate, they say, no, don't go there. The trolls are there. Then the plots would happen differently.
Speaking of that, the lack of communication devices in Starfield just drives me crazy.
There's no communications in Starfield.
Well, no, the lack of communication devices. So like you have all these quests where it's like, go here and talk to this guy. I'm like, why can't I just call him and be like, hey, what's the next step? And be like, just done with it. Like they have anyway. It's
the no Ansible network. See, they.
All right. So there is one more question I want to make sure that we get to before we run out of time, because I think this is an amazing question from Kevin Sinclair. It's what do you feel that makes sci-fi? What do you feel that sci-fi can offer that fantasy can't? and why do you think it's not quite as popular as fantasy within the little RPG genre? So I want to know what you guys think it makes sci-fi better as an option for people to choose rather than over fantasy. Let's start with Neil on this one.
We kind of started at this place, and I'll kind of come back to it, that I feel that even the most, and I said this in a comment in a panel the other day, even the most like Black Death, medieval, middle agey, epic fantasy gamelet usually has floating screens in front of people, which is the most sci-fi thing ever. And so that's my first response to that is that as well too, that I sort of feel that any fantasy is ensconced in a sci-fi delivery system in any case, I forget, someone said, like, wouldn't it be ridiculous if they had to pull out papers and write down things every time they leveled up, and it rained, and most people can't write or do math, but in these medieval eras. But what I think that sci-fi does really well is that thing about it's that what if thing that we were just talking about, right? It gives a projection of what is possible as we advance, and it offers models for possible societal improvement. Usually it kind of operates on a society or planetary or galactic level, and what fantasy does well is that it speaks to people's sort of dreams, and like that sort of like basic wish we have to fly, right? The most common wish or dream that people have about flying. Now, fantasy does that immediately well, but we all fly using science. We all actually accomplish that doing science. So it's like what fantasy aspires to, science and science fiction sort of achieves. As to why more people want to read fantasy rather than sci-fi, I'm never really sure why that is sort of said about how fantasy just sells better than sci-fi, and so the gamelet market reacts to that, and people's fantasy books sell better than their pure sci-fi books that are, I would like to see as gamelet kind of grows and there's more serious endeavors made into Cyberpunk, City of Artem, that sort of space that they both occupy that we've been talking about satisfy that same itch and propagate a bit more. I would love to be doing more sci-fi gamelet as it kind of goes along, and then maybe kind of have that be the case where the itch that fantasy usually scratches gets scratched by sci-fi, and vice versa as well, or that there's more harmonious kind of, it's the slinging spells in one hand and a Glock in the other kind of approach to things that that urban fantasy does really well. I would love to see more of that kind of element worked into gamelet as well too. Before I did gamelet, I used to do a ton of urban fantasy, and so that sort of blending of cultures and ideas that happens in the urban fantasy space, I'd love to see more of that happening in the gamelet space as well too. That's it.
Yeah, so there's
Steven,
a
what do
hierarchy
you think is truly the thing that makes sci-fi better?
So there's a hierarchy of like sales as far as book goes.
Oh, you're muted
romance is
now.
at the top.
Is he? I hear him.
Hello.
I hear him.
Can you hear me?
I hear him
Steven
fine.
was.
Okay. Oh.
Oh, is it
So
my turn?
Oh.
I thought Xander was going.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
I'll make my answer quick and simple. I love spaceships. I love mechs. I love the being able to go out. The idea that humans are going out and exploring a galaxy and discovering new things on not just a planetary scale or a continent like in fantasy, but being able to planet hop and jump around from one place to another, and using our engineering, our technology to advance. It's something that I feel is special and unique in its own way that makes me love sci-fi.
That's great.
And I'll let Xander go now.
Yeah, I was gonna say we'll pass it to Xander.
So there's like a hierarchy of how much people earn things, and I don't know if I've ever seen an example of it, but it seems to go romance, thrillers, fantasy, and then science fiction is at the bottom. And I think that's from most relatable to least relatable is probably what is how it goes. Is more people can relate to romance and to wanting to be in that sword and sorry, what is it? It's anyway. I forget what the term that my mom uses because she's a romance librarian.
There is a lot of escapism in fantasy, and I think a lot of people are able to relate to that more.
Yeah, so it's so you have just this. There's more people that relate to, having a romantic relationship and wanting to be in a different romantic relationship and wanting to have, multiple lovers or whatever it is, and then it just kind of goes down that line. More people relate to things that they're afraid of. So thrillers and things that those have a lot more commonality between us. And then there's just a very small section of people, I think, that are interested in space and interested in something beyond Earth. And I think that's where science fiction kind of loses out, is that there's so many people that are focused on the here and now that they don't want to look at the outernal things, which is unfortunate, because I mean, obviously everyone on this panel is very interested in space and everything that goes outside, but I think that's probably why science fiction is less desired, is because there's less people who are focusing on stuff so far outside of their control that they think that it just doesn't relate to them.
Okay. And Gabriel, how about you? What do you think is the thing that sets science fiction apart and makes it better, in your opinion, and also what might make it less popular?
I don't know about better. I mean, I love both genres, but I think a lot of people, I don't know if the majority, but a lot of people read for escapism. And I think fantasy is like the ultimate escapism, because it's never going to be real, right? And you can be like, oh, I can lose myself in this world and da 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 da. Whereas science fiction has to have like a basis somewhere in reality, so you can't go full, like you just can't fully go. I mean, obviously there's exceptions, but like when I read like a Dragonlance novel, I know this is not real, but I know if I read like The Martian, this could possibly happen one day. This is cool. And then I really think about the technical aspects. Then I also think
potatoes.
A lot of people,
Yeah, the greatest part about The Martian was the potatoes.
yeah. But I think a lot of people too don't want to have to care about science fiction, like the actual science fiction part, the science of it. A lot of people go into reading or fantasy just to, escape, and they don't want to have to think about stuff. So I think that might be one of the reasons that there's a little bit of a difference between the two. So I don't know.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. All right, well, we are at 1:57, giving us about 3 minutes left. If we go just a tiny bit over, it's not going to hurt anybody's feelings, but I do want to give everybody a chance to do one more plug-in here at the end for what you're working on, things you're excited about coming up. Gabriel, why don't you go ahead and get us started with that?
Oh, great. So I've written quite a few books. My I Am Gamer series, Lit RPG, Warrior Academy, Lit RPG, anime-based. Currently, my current series is science fiction time travel. It's From Chef to Crafter to Conqueror. I currently have the first 2 books out, Chef, second book, Crafter. And it was supposed to be a 3-book series. Now it's a 4. And the third book, Crafter Part 2, will be out the 1st of November. And then I'll have Part 4 out sometime within a year.
And when will Part 5 come out?
I don't know about you guys, but
And
like
6.
when I hit book 4, I'm like, I can't do it anymore. I have too much stuff to remember. New thing.
Yeah, it definitely, like I watched a Brandon Sanderson article about how as a series gets bigger, the harder it is to write the next book.
I love the first book. It's my favorite. The first book is so easy. It's just like, oh, it's everything I want to say. And then book 2, I'm like, what was the name of the stable boy? Oh, who was the girl that was the ninja's assassin's partner in chapter,
Sorry, not to get, anyway, I'll go
Sorry.
next because
Yep,
we're low on time. Working on Red Mage book 4, which is, as we just discussed, always difficult. And then also another project that I can't really talk about, but I always have to work on 2, otherwise I just get distracted and get stuck. Anyway, whole thing.
All right, Stephen, go ahead and get us your plug in there.
If you like space dungeons, check out Stardivers. If you like fantasy, check out Temple of the Storm, Vampire Sorcerer. And I've also got a sci-fi Station Core with Jeffrey Falcon Logue. We just released the 2nd book, and the audiobook narrated and sung by Jessica Threet is out this Halloween.
Awesome. That sounds great. Neil, why don't you go ahead and give us what you're working on and what kind of things you're excited about seeing?
I'm currently working on Tale Smash, third book of Dragon Sorcerer by Sean Oswald. I have a bunch of things coming up and I'm excited about. Arcane Cultivator by Harmon Cooper coming out in November. Arcane Cultivator 1. Arcane Cultivator 2 is coming hot on its heels. On a Throne of Lies, Bad Guys 10 by Eric Ugland also coming out in a couple months. Let's see what else.
Bad Guys 10.
I guess also Rise of Boshbob, City of Artem, that duology of that section of the City of Artem universe has been recorded. I'm not sure it's coming up. We're recording the next one also next month as well too, and also coming up recording Judge by Michael Head, which I'm recording in a couple months from now too. I'm excited about. All great people, all great books, and just excited to kind of grind through them all.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you guys again for spending your time with us and coming here to the panel. Again, we know that there's other things you could be doing. We're very appreciative of the time that you've come here. I want to thank you so much for spending that time with us. If anybody wants to continue the conversation, there is a Discord channel for the Science of Science Fiction. You can go ahead and check that out and ask any additional questions. The panelists can feel free to jump in and answer them. Just talk with the fans or each other, over these. Throw out some more conspiracy series to go through as well. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us, and we want to thank everybody for coming to watch us. There is going to be a takeover, I believe, after this, and if you guys want to take a chance to see that as well, they'll be highlighting an author there. So again, thank you guys so much. Time for us to wave goodbye to the people.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I think we're still live, but thank you.
What do I do with
Still
my
live.
hands?
Still live.
Still